In this video, I'm going to explain Vietnam tourism, and by that I mean what is tourism in Vietnam. I've been here over 12 years and my business is basically in tourism. But when a family member or friend asks me what to do in Vietnam, I often feel very stuck. I don't know what to say to them or what to recommend. So yes, this is a difficult topic to unpack, but bear with me. I'm going to split this into some tourism categories. The ones that are important to me are backpacker, beer drinking tourism, motorbike tourism, like what we do, Vietnamese tourism and the way the locals travel, the person interested in culture and the person interested in the war. The not so important categories to me are golf tourism, usually in the form of Koreans, the foodie, and finally, sex tourism. I don't really need to go there. Let's try and explain. You see, Vietnam is long and thin. It is famous for its coastline. Most of Vietnam's infrastructure runs up the coastline, both in terms of the train and the major highway connecting the south to the north. A backpacker or normal tourist will find themselves on a very set route using sleeper buses or the train. The bus or train route south to north goes something like this. Ho Chi Minh to Mui Ne or Dalat. Both Mui Ne and Dalat are actually optional these days. Mui Ne or Dalat to Nha Trang, Nha Trang to Hoi An, Hoi An to Phong Nha, and Phong Nha to Ninh Binh, Ninh Binh to Hanoi, Hanoi to Hai Yang, and Hai Yang back to Hanoi. Maybe throw Sapa in there somewhere as well. This is a very typical route. Vietnam tourism in general is sort of mass-scale, cheap, low-quality tourism. This doesn't necessarily mean it is bad. I enjoyed it when I first came, but it is not adventure tourism by any stretch of the imagination. Everything is very commercialized, easy to do, and cheap on a mass scale. Take Ban Na Hills and the Golden Hand thing, it's okay. Take Fancy Pan in Sapa. I mean, it's got a cable car to the top. What more can I say? Take Nha Trang and its beach parties, hot sea and beer. It's a good time, there's no doubt about that. Basically, the country really lends itself to the 20 to 30-year-old beer-drinking backpacker, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it is true. The person losing out, in my eyes, is the 30-plus-year-old traveller who perhaps has some experience under their belt around the world, and is a little bit past dorm rooms and beer. Or, of course, the adventure tourist who finds themselves without a bike for some reason. These are the people who actually want to escape it all and experience what I would consider the real Vietnam. This is extremely hard to do without A, quite a bit of time, and B, without a motorbike. In Vietnam, we go from extremely commercialized tourism on the coastline to basically no major infrastructure in the mountains. To further this, to really experience Vietnam properly, you need to be in the mountains, and there just isn't a bus tourism route through the mountains at all. How do you get from Buon Ma Thuot to Pleiku, for example? I don't know. Let's list our recommended motorbike routes, and you will see just how much it differs from the bus and train route mentioned earlier. Ho Chi Minh to Cat Yên, Cat Yên to Dalat, Dalat to Nha Trang, Nha Trang to Quy Nhon, Quy Nhon to Mang Den, Mang Den to Hoi An, Hoi An to Khe Sanh, Khe Sanh to Phong Nha, Phong Nha to Vinh, Vinh to Phu Long, no way to pronounce that, Phu Long to Hanoi, and we don't do Sapa or Hai Yang either at this company. We actually recommend you go to the northwest instead, but ultimately any of the north is accessible and cool with a bike. So there isn't a huge amount of overlap when it comes to the bike route against the bus and train route. I think that alone sort of paints the picture of what I'm trying to get at here. Okay, so what do you actually do in Vietnam in terms of tourist activities? So this is hard to answer, and it's the reason for the video, because the truth is that the well-traveled 30-plus-year-old flashpacker, that's a backpacker with money, is not going to be amused by the Instagram and selfie-taking concrete tourism jungles that Vietnam has set up. Does a 30-year-old really want to go to the crazy house in Dalat? I'm not so sure. You see, Vietnamese tend to travel with the idea of taking photos. Everything is set up for a picture. Very little is real. COVID really sped this process up as well, where what were once foreign tourism attractions such as waterfalls got converted into concrete jungles with elevators to the bases of waterfalls and karaoke shops nearby, the alpine roller coasters, this kind of thing. It's also fun for families, by the way, but not the adventure tourist. You get the idea, and I call this Vietnamese tourism. I'm not here to judge, but what I will say is that the way the average Vietnamese person travels and the average foreigner travels is very different. I'm going to have to be blunt here and sum it up with basically one word: gimmicky. There are of course exceptions to this and a sliding scale of what people might consider a gimmick or not. For example, I'm not a huge fan of Hoi An's gimmicks, but most tourists love it. But your average adventure tourist, the kind of person who might do a climbing holiday, hiking holiday, or maybe a motorbike holiday, needs to be very careful about getting sucked into gimmicky tourism. So from my perspective, the answer to the question about what to do in Vietnam really is summed up with these three concepts. Which one are you? You just drive a motorbike? This is enough. You don't need to do tourism. 2, you do some real caving tours in Phong Nha. I don't mean the commercial stuff, but the hardcore tours. And 3, you can join the beer drinking backpacker circuit. Go for it, and there's nothing wrong with that. There is a 4th option as well, but a hard one to pull off, and that is hiking tours. Vietnam is actually very good for hiking, but unfortunately at this time it is set up for Vietnamese and it is hard to find hiking tours representing themselves in English. If I had more time, this would be a new business venture, figuring out how to make established hiking routes accessible to the foreigner. But for now, no one has done it. You can find hiking tours for foreigners in Hai Yang around the north, but unfortunately, I haven't really figured it out in terms of enough detail to be able to refer or recommend any services. Either way, if hiking is your thing, keep an eye out for it. It is here. I'll give you some examples of ones I'm trying to do, which is Ta Nang between Dalat and Mui Ne. I'd like to try the K50 waterfall near the Mang Den area. And then a real, potentially golden hotspot would be the town of Tram Tao in the northwest, where we go for off-road tours. But I haven't done any of these things yet. Moving on, let's talk about the person wanting to experience Vietnam's culture or the plain foodie. This is an interesting one because you can experience Vietnam's culture on the bus and train route up the coast. However, it is sort of a tailored culture. In other words, on the coastline, you are traveling to places that know how to handle and deal with tourists and foreigners. So not a great deal of it is truly authentic. It is developed and it is calculated tourism. Again, nothing particularly wrong with that, but it's the truth. You can get away from this by going to places such as Quy Nhon on the coast, but even Quy Nhon has a small but understood expat community. A tourist or a white guy in general is not an unseen sight. Even the food is tailored to foreigner tastes in tourist areas, and you will find that Vietnamese food in tourist areas is not actually Vietnamese food. It is Vietnamese food for foreigners. If you take a Vietnamese person and you put them in a pho bo shop in a backpacker street, they probably won't really like it. Most foreigners are not actually that comfortable with real Vietnamese food. It tends to push boundaries a bit. Snails, for example, do you want some? Or how about fish sauce on every single dish? It is an acquired taste, of which most backpackers, especially on bus and train routes, don't really get to truly experience. Lucky them. Anyway, for both culture and food, you kind of need to get away from the tourist areas, and this requires a motorbike. It really is very hard to escape tourism with no motorbike. Those foodie channels on YouTube wondering about street food markets in tourist areas, it's not really Vietnamese food. As I say, it's Vietnamese food for foreigners. Anyway, how about the war tourist? This is actually a very common question to get on emails. And the truth is the war is all but forgotten in Vietnam. I suppose this is a good thing and a bad thing, a happy thing and a sad thing. The few war-based attractions that do exist, the tunnels for example, and the museums, are mass-scale commercialized tourism. You absolutely must do them though. The Netflix show about the Vietnam War really opened my eyes to just how many potentially famous sites and battles there should or could be in Vietnam. But these simply don't exist. Take for example the famous Napalm Girl photo, which is actually located near the Cambodian border, not so far from Ho Chi Minh. There is nothing there, just a rundown restaurant. How about the famous shot of the very last helicopter departing the US Embassy in Ho Chi Minh? Well, it turns out you can replicate the exact angle of this shot, but it is on the top of some dude's house. It isn't a tourist attraction. What a missed opportunity, eh? That's my next business. Even Hamburger Hill. When I went there, this was more or less abandoned. From the Netflix show, I learned that there were so many big battles in the Mekong Delta. I literally had no idea about them. For sure, there is no way to visit or find anything about them now. The northwest of Vietnam, Dien Bien Phu, many events took place around there. I know nothing of it. We have begun some war-based tour research, primarily in the Da Nang to Phong Nha area. However, what the client has to realize is that most of these places are just empty fields or trees at this point. Maybe a memorial stone or something. So if you have a personal connection to these places, then they probably will mean a lot. And perhaps the fact that they are not commercialized tourist hotspots is a good thing. But if you are a tourist just curious about the war and you don't have personal connections to it, then these places won't mean anything to you. And my advice, as strange as it may sound, is to travel Vietnam as if the war never happened, because that appears to be the way the Vietnamese see it. You hit the main war attractions, take in a mild piece of history, and move on to enjoy the present day. Okay, to wrap this video up, if you are my mum and dad who has extensively traveled third world and developing countries, and maybe have done some of the hardest hiking trails in the world, or you are my 30-year-old lifelong friend from back home who doesn't know how to drive a motorbike, then I really don't know what to recommend to you in Vietnam. I have nothing to say. I'll throw some caves in Phong Nha at you, but I'm not going to be recommending you to go to Phan Pan in Sapa, or to Ba Na Golden Bridge thing, or even to a lot of the waterfalls. It's embarrassing to recommend to a real hiker or adventure seeker some of these activities. This doesn't mean they or you wouldn't enjoy the country. You will. It just won't be your favorite place on earth. And you probably will never come back. But you will enjoy it and have some fun with it. On the other hand, if you are my 20-year-old cousin on a gap year and traveling the world by drinking beer around cheap Southeast Asian countries, hey, I've been there as well. Then I can recommend an awesome itinerary, even using the bus or train. But of course, if you are someone who drives motorbikes or wants to dabble in the idea of driving motorbikes, then I have endless things to recommend to you, and Vietnam will probably be your favorite place on earth. If you are a war tourist, then I feel ashamed by how little I currently know. And I just want you to know that I am slowly working on building this side of the company up. And unfortunately at this time, I am not sure there are any other companies out there that know anything more than I do. A shame, but there you go. I hope this video has been helpful.